Welcome, everyone. I'm Morley Winograd, the president and co-founder of the Campaign for Free College Tuition. I want to welcome you to our conference on why the road to economic recovery runs through affordable higher education. It's brought to you by the campaign, or CFCT as we sometimes call it, and the Upjohn Institute's Investing in Community project, which is aptly named Promise. Let me just do a couple of minutes here of introduction as we make sure everybody's on with regard to our organization. CFCT is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We are in our 6th year of existence. Our mission is to make public colleges and universities tuition free in all 50 states by acting as a catalyst and a coalition builder to inspire creation of free college tuition programs. And we do so through events and programs in education such as the one we're glad to have you join with us on today. Our advisory council is co-chaired by Governor Gina Raimondo of Rhode Island and former Governor James Blanchard from Michigan. And we are delighted to have Governor Blanchard on the call personally at this point in time, and representing Governor Raimondo, who's had a couple of things going on in her life the last couple of days. Her Deputy Chief of Staff, Kevin Gallagher, who has been so helpful and instrumental in coordinating our work across the governor's offices and across the country. So let's get started. We have a packed agenda. In the course of 1 hour together, if you have questions, since we will have a couple of segments that make those questions doable, please use the Zoom Q&A function to pose them, and we will get to as many as we can. Now I'm delighted to be joined. In fact, I see him already. Our first guest, Ted Mitchell. I've had the privilege of working with Ted on innovative education policies for over 25 years. As Undersecretary in President Obama's Department of Education, he played the key role in shaping that administration's Fed-state partnership to make community colleges, tuition free. Now he is president of ACE, the American Council on Education, which makes him an even more powerful voice in DC on education issues. Ted, welcome.
Morley, thank you. It's great to be here.
As always, it's good to talk with you. Let's not bore the audience with our friendship conversation too much. Why don't you begin, for everybody who for some reason doesn't know who ACE is, describing what you do as president of ACE, because that's a position that's considerably different than undersecretary.
It's very different. And while we're talking undersecretary, I want to say a special hello to my predecessor as undersecretary, Martha Cantor, who has been so important to this work and so important in establishing the Obama team's agenda for higher education. So Martha, great to be with you. The American Council on Education has been around for 100 years. We represent all of higher education. We're the only organization that represents community colleges, public 4-year, private 4-year, institutions, independent institutions across the board. And so we try to use our voice to elaborate public policies that help advance the entire sector, with the idea of student access and completion at the forefront of everything we do.
So how does ACE's policy positions line up with the notion of economic recovery being dependent upon affordable higher education?
Yeah, we have been very steadfast in our understanding, not just a belief, but an understanding of the research that shows us that whether we're talking about individual success, community success, or our success as a nation, economic progress depends more and more on access to post-secondary education. And so we believe that access to an affordable, high-quality post-secondary education is absolutely essential to move the economy forward. And we think that the pandemic and the associated economic downturn has only increased the importance of the work that, Morley, that you're doing and the work that all of the sector is doing to improve access and completion.
And over and above access, as you mentioned, affordability, what is ACE's current position with regard to ideas that you'd like Congress to consider to make college more affordable?
Yep. We know that affordability matters. It matters as you look at the increase in tuition rates over time. We believe that the increase in tuition rates, especially in public institutions, have a lot to do with state disinvestment. And so when we look at restoring accessibility by increasing affordability, we're looking at a number of things. The top of our list is doubling the Pell Grant program. We believe that doubling the Pell Grant program has a built-in means test to it. Doubling the Pell Grant program would make virtually every community college in the country tuition free, and would make more than a third of public four-year institutions tuition free for students. So we believe that that is an important area to look at. We also look at the Promise programs around the country, very encouraged by them. We continue to encourage tuition-free community college programs, not only because it helps to increase the throughput in higher education, but it really establishes, as we talked about in the Obama administration, it establishes a threshold for publicly supported universal access to education, public education from kindergarten through what would be grade 14. And we believe that that 2-year bump is important in an increasingly knowledge-based economy.
So you're interested in and encouraging the concept of K-14 in the long run.
That's right. And we see K-14 as a new floor for educational access and achievement for the American population.
Well, it's interesting because in the President-elect Biden's campaign and presumably soon to be translated into policy and budgets, both doubling of Pell Grants and making the first 2 years of community college tuition free are key planks in his higher education policy program. There is, of course, a third and more well-known position because it's been in the Democratic Party's platform anyway for the last 2 presidential elections, and that's to make 4 years of public college tuition free, but means tested for families earning less than $125,000. Has ACE talked to the Biden team about those proposals? Have you been approached? Do you have any comment about them?
You know, we've been engaged in conversations with the campaign, as we were with the Trump campaign as well. We continue to support a variety of tools to get to the goal that we have in mind, which is access to an affordable, high-quality education. And so, having a proposal on the table for 4 years of access to public higher education is certainly an important part of that. In the same breath, it's important for us to recognize the importance of the independent sector in providing access to students and increasingly to underrepresented students. And so we do want to make sure that broad-gauged proposals for subsidizing tuition in higher education includes both high-quality independent institutions as well as public institutions. So
this sounds like there's a lot of room for common ground going forward. You know, obviously in the course of 4 years of a presidency, there'll be lots of dialogue back and forth, but even at the outset, assuming that, as we believe is necessary, higher education funding and support will be part of an economic recovery package, it sounds like there's going to be a lot of opportunity for engagement by your organization with the Biden administration. And that's very good news. Now, we've asked people to submit their own questions. They don't have to just listen to mine. And we have a first one in here for you, Ted, if you're ready. I'll read it to you, although a shortened version may yet appear on our screen, but it's a long question, so it may not fit. The question to you is, shouldn't we link Pell Grant levels to the local cost of living? The cost of attendance is much different in rural Alabama compared to, say, New York City.
Yeah, so I think refinements to the Pell Grant program, particularly regarding cost of attendance issues, will be important as we refine this. I think it's important for us to start with moving the big rocks first. So let's double Pell, and then let's look at how we refine that. Even before cost of living increases, I think that our organization would feel strongly that any doubling of a Pell Grant program would be associated with a maintenance of effort provision for states, because the last thing we want is for the federal government to be supplanting important state investments in higher education. And I think, Morley, that's one of the places where the campaign for free college tuition has been most important, is reminding states of their stake in this game.
And in the Obama administration, in the proposal you helped shape, the incentive was there because of matching funds. But in a doubling of Pell Grants environment, we'd have to come up with alternative ways of making sure that states disinvest and exchange state dollars for federal dollars.
Right.
Okay. Do we have another question yet from the audience? If not, I have one final question as we use up the time we have for this segment to pose to you, Ted. You have existed and operated at the highest levels of the nation's higher education conversations and policy, not just the job you have today, but formerly as a president of a university and all kinds of other activities. Do you see in the long run, now I underline long run, do you see in the long run an evolution of the nation's higher education to a more centralized system, or do you believe that it will continue to retain its uniquely American decentralized and independent voices kind of structure?
It's a great question, and I'm convinced even more now, watching institutions going through the pandemic and watching the changes that are happening on the ground. I'm more convinced than ever that we will remain a very diverse set of institutions, a diverse set of governance systems, and I think that that's all to the good, because that diversity allows us to be more flexible, to innovate in ways that wouldn't be as possible in a centralized system. And I think that there's no better example of that, Morley, than the set of promise programs that have emerged around the country with many different flavors, many different ideas, many different structures. It creates a giant living learning experience for us all to draw from. So I'm a hearty supporter of, and I think of diversity, and think we are long in that in the future.
Well, that's a great segue for our next segment. The question that we just got internally from the audience relates to that diversity, which I'm going to save it for our next presenters, since they are the experts on community-based promise programs. For those of you who don't know, Ted is just now recovering from a bout with COVID-19. So we're especially thankful that he was able to recover, and even more thankful that that recovery allowed him to participate in today's program. Thanks, Ted, for joining us. It's always a pleasure.
It's always great to be with you, and wear your masks, everyone.
Absolutely. All right, so our next presentation will indeed come to us from two people who have studied promise programs from the beginning. As many of you may know, the first community-based promise program was in Kalamazoo, Michigan, the location of the W.E. Upjohn Institute. And as a result of that, they established a research program for employment research. One of our presenters, Brad Hirschbein, is the senior economist for that particular research program, along with a number of other important, and I don't know how you have time for it all, jobs at Upjohn. And the other, who will speak first and present their current research in this arena, is Michelle Miller Adams, who is a senior researcher there and a professor at Grand Valley State College, but it is actually maybe best known as the person who literally wrote the book on the Kalamazoo Promise. And the good news is that next April, she's going to be publishing a new book The Path to Free College. And April makes it a very timely publication indeed. Michelle, welcome to the conference.
Thank you so much, Morley. We're really glad to be here, and we're happy to have the Upjohn Institute co-sponsoring this event with CFCT. I want to say a little bit about the Upjohn Institute and our work on Promise programs, and then I will hand the responsibilities to present the findings of our research off to my colleague, Brad. The Upjohn Institute is a nonpartisan research institute that has been based in Kalamazoo, Michigan for many, many decades. We were founded back in 1945 with an endowment that allows us a lot of flexibility in terms of what we study. We do study issues related to employment and unemployment, but we define that really broadly in ways that allows us to encompass looking at things like education, workforce development programs, economic development. And we have an operational arm as well that allows us to learn from practitioners who are actually housed within our organization. The Michigan Works federal and state funded workforce agency for our 4-county region in Southwest Michigan is located within the Upjohn Institute. So a couple of years ago, and you can move to the next slide, the Upjohn Institute introduced a major research initiative called Investing in Community. And our goal was to leverage research that the Institute and its staff had been doing for a long time more individually and put it together. This involved research on state and local place-based policies that look both at what we call the labor supply and the labor demand side, how you give practical advice to communities and to states to help residents get and keep good jobs by working both on the business side and on kind of the education and training side to help these communities, many of which are distressed, create broadly shared or inclusive growth that reaches all of their residents. As I said, we draw on both research and practice in putting some of these ideas forward. And while we understand the importance of national, federal initiatives and federal money, we're especially interested in more bottom-up solutions that come from the state or local level and that represent grassroots or state-level innovation to respond to the particular needs of those localities. So you can go to the next slide. That quite naturally, as well as our location in Kalamazoo, led us to start working early on understanding the meaning of the Kalamazoo Promise and the many programs that have been developed since that are modeled on it. The Kalamazoo Promise is the first of the current generation of around 200 tuition-free college programs that emanate either from local communities or from community colleges. And we've been involved for 15 years, looking at both the educational and economic impacts of the Kalamazoo Promise, and also convening researchers to carry out some comparative research into programs that, getting at the question that came through earlier that we'll address later, programs that are structured in different ways and set up slightly differently. We've collected all of this information in a Promise Programs database that you're welcome to browse or also request the full version of. It's a very, very rich database about these 200 programs. We also work with states and localities around Promise Program design issues and cost estimations. And we've been involved in co-convening a series of conferences called PromiseNet, which happen roughly annually. Fortunately, we had not planned one for this year, but we will be back with our next live conference in Kalamazoo a year from now in November 2021. These are wonderful opportunities for practitioners and policymakers to come together. We are about to present you with the very first research that is available in the field on the workforce outcomes of these Promise Scholarship programs. This 15 years of research has shown that Promise programs can increase post-secondary enrollment and, just as important, the earning of credentials and degrees. That research comes from studies of the more generous Promise programs that allow students to take either a 2-year or a 4-year path. That includes programs in Kalamazoo, El Dorado, Arkansas, Pittsburgh, but also 2-year programs. And the one we'll be looking at today is the one that was based in Knox County, Tennessee, that became the basis for the creation of the Tennessee Promise. And the question we are addressing with this research is whether these degrees translate into better workforce outcomes for people who received scholarships. Do they contribute to a community's economic vitality? And overall, are they worthwhile investments? Some of the things you might look at to answer these questions are the employment rates, income levels, debt load, and location decisions of Promise recipients. It turns out to be really, really hard to get at those questions, and Brad will tell you a little bit more about why. But this particular research was funded by the Strata Education Network, and it involves case studies of the Kalamazoo Promise, Knox Achieves, and Pittsburgh Promise. The people carrying out that research, some of them are with us today. Celeste Carruthers of University of Tennessee leads the Tennessee team, and Lindsay Page and Jennifer Iridy are leading the Pittsburgh Promise work. Each team of researchers, Brad led our team of researchers in Kalamazoo, used different analytical methods to meet some of the really formidable data challenges that come up when you try to study the workforce outcomes of Promise programs. So I'm now going to turn things over to Brad to share with you some preliminary, it's in red and underlined, findings from Knox Achieves and Kalamazoo Promise.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Marley. We're happy to be here at this event. We hope the information proves useful for many people, from practitioners, journalists, researchers, and many others. And so I'm going to be talking about very preliminary results that we have for two of the programs that Michelle just mentioned. The first of those is Knox Achieves, which, as Michelle also mentioned, grew up in Knox County, Tennessee. It's a last dollar community college program. One thing that we should note about Tennessee and a few other states, that in addition to normal community colleges, they also have technical colleges, which tend to be a little bit more focused on career and technical education, specifically that's possibly more workforce related. So it's a very interesting program to study for those reasons, especially. And Celeste and her team have worked to combine education data they have from the state of Tennessee with unemployment insurance wage records also from the state, so that they can look at both educational attainment and workforce outcomes, including some of the ones that Michelle just mentioned, employment and earnings. And so far, Celeste and her team have found that there is an increase in certificate and associate degree attainment, which is good because it is a community college program. You might also care about bachelor's degree attainment. So far, the effects there are not quite as clear. They may change over time, but it doesn't seem to be strong in one way or the other. They also, and this is important, find an increase in the chance of beneficiaries of the Knox Achieves Scholarship having earnings in state, that is to say, an increase in their likelihood of being employed within the state of around 2 to 7 percentage points between 1 and up to 9 years after they leave high school. That's about as far as we can go at this point. And then, conditional on being employed in the state, they're also finding positive earnings effects. And so far, they're finding up to 9% higher earnings 7 years after high school graduation, around the time of their mid-20s. And then also importantly, we care about heterogeneity or different effects for different groups. And so far, they are finding stronger effects both for Black students and for men. We don't exactly know all of the details as to why that might be the case, and this may change a little bit going forward, but it is not the case that the largest racial minority group in Tennessee is faring worse from the scholarship. If anything, they are doing better. Could you advance the slide, please? And there is just an image showing some of the earnings effects for the Knox Achieves by year elapsed. One more time, please. And so the other program that we can talk about today is Kalamazoo Promise, which is quite different from Knox Achieves in its setup. It is a first dollar scholarship, so the money can stack on top of other scholarships and grant monies that students receive, including paying for things like room and board, transportation, books, etc. And it was located in Kalamazoo, Michigan, which is about halfway between Detroit and Chicago. And as Michelle mentioned, it has inspired many other programs since. It is one of the more generous programs in the country. And then in an earlier paper, my colleagues and I had investigated the impacts of the Kalamazoo Promise on educational attainment outcomes, and we found that there was a strong increase in the likelihood that students got a bachelor's degree of around 7 to 10 percentage points 6 years after they graduated high school. That translates into between a quarter and a third increase in the share of students getting bachelor's degrees. And then in the current paper, we have been working to combine our education data on the Kalamazoo Promise also with unemployment insurance wage records from the state of Michigan, which has some advantages and disadvantages. We can only look at people within the state, but we also are able to observe their zip code or their location, so we know if they are in the state, where they're living. And we have mixed evidence so far. For one, we find that there's very little change in the chance of having in-state earnings for Kalamazoo Promise beneficiaries, even up to 10 years after high school graduation. We're just not seeing much there. We also find that there's little change in the average earnings of Kalamazoo Promise recipients, again, 7 to 10 years after high school graduation when they're in their mid to late 20s. But if we advance the slide one more time again, please. This here is a graph that's not looking at, it's looking at distributional impacts on quarterly earnings, because that's how the data get recorded, in the same time frame. And so what we're looking at is the chance that students or former students, I should say, are making above certain earnings thresholds at this time period. And you can see that that middle green line is actually elevated. And this is translating into that there is an increased chance that beneficiaries are making between $6,000 and $10,000 per quarter, or $24,000 and $40,000 per year in their mid to late 20s. We are seeing an increasing chance that students are making that much money in the state. And so advance one more time, please. And so there is just the summary. And in addition to that effect on earnings in the middle of the distribution, we are finding that students are more likely to reside close to Kalamazoo than they were previously. Over 10 percentage points more likely to live within 10 miles, or certainly within commuting distance or working distance of the community that is educating them. And that's good for an economic development point of view. And so just to wrap up, next slide, please. We are finding that both programs, despite very large differences in their design and their cost, are increasing credential attainment, which is good. They were designed to do exactly that, and they appear to be doing it. However, the Knox Achieves program seems to be having stronger impacts on earnings than what is a more generous and a program that has produced more bachelor's degrees, the Kalamazoo Promise. Why might this be the case? Well, it's still very early. These are preliminary estimates. I can't emphasize that enough. We have shared them with our colleagues at academic seminars and conferences, but they have not been peer reviewed. Not yet, at least. And we just have results for 2 communities thus far, but the community and technical colleges, they might be more close, as I was saying before, more closely tied towards specific workforce preparation and the types of jobs that businesses are demanding in the area. So that might help entry into the workforce a little bit. Also, the time horizon is still relatively early. The mid-20s is still on the early side, and we know that people's earnings are generally rising fairly rapidly at this stage in their career. So looking again in a few more years might change things. And then finally, the local labor markets and job opportunities might matter quite a lot. Knoxville, Tennessee is still in the Sun Belt pretty much, and it has been growing in population and jobs for the last 2 decades. Kalamazoo, Michigan is in the industrial heartland, if you want to call it that. It has not been growing in population and jobs as much. And so the job opportunities may matter. And this is to say that we are learning that tuition-free college can certainly boost educational attainment, but if you wanted to improve workforce outcomes, we may need more, and it should be tied to other job development strategies too. And with that, I will wrap up, and we have some contact information on this slide, and I look forward to taking questions from the audience. Thank you very much.
Let's leave the slide with contact information up just a little bit longer in case people need to take it down. Well, I want to thank Michelle and Brad for that preliminary research presentation. I know they worked hard to be ready here to give you some important nuggets from what they're already learning. And we look forward to the completion of their research, which we will share with everybody who's on this call, and we're invited on this call when it's ready later in 2021. We do have some questions for Brad and Michelle. We are not going to ask them to answer them now, but later. But just as a heads up, Michelle, we'll have a question for you on best practices in Promise programs. and questions about, for you, Brad, about racial and ethnic group variation in the Kalamazoo world, as well as the level of significant stats, although that may have to wait for the more detailed research completion. Now I want to turn to our final two speakers, our last segment, and then when these two speakers are done, we will in fact return all four speakers, the last four anyway, to the podium, so to speak, virtual podium, to address any questions that we have, and I've already indicated we have several for the last two presenters. The next two presenters I'd like to introduce are Jack McKenzie, who has been providing CFCT with unique survey research, some of which he'll share today, on free college tuition. That activity is separate from his duties as the CEO of College App, a company he founded that helps community colleges increase their enrollments. However, to begin this segment, we're going to first hear from Doug Ross. He was formerly the vice president of CFCT's board, but he's currently, because he got hired away, senior advisor to Michigan Governor Whitmer, and on his area of responsibility is Michigan's prosperity. He's going to give us a brief case study on how to get free college tuition ideas passed in a bipartisan manner. So let me ask Doug to begin his presentation, and it'll go back and forth between him and Jack, and then we'll wrap up and go to questions. Don't forget to type in any questions you might have for these two presenters as well.
Great, thank you, Morley. Well, last March, Gretchen Whitmer, the Democratic governor of Michigan, and the Republican-led legislature enacted a tuition-free college bill that essentially provided universal access to community college tuition-free for all Michiganders 25 or older who did not have a college degree. It took us more than a year. We learned a lot about, we think, how to advance free college proposals in a divided government in a fairly heated partisan context. And while we certainly realize that every state has different politics and the federal government more different still, hopefully what we learned and what we did can be of some use to all of you who are working on behalf of free college at the state and federal level. So looking back, we really pursued, and the government pursued,
advance the slide.
A four-step process. I'm sorry, Morley, I keep hearing you. Step one was, before deciding to make this a priority in our first state of the state, Governor wanted to know whether or not we in fact had popular public support, particularly from Republicans and independents. If we're not popular with voters, the chances of getting a Democratic proposal through the Republican legislature were essentially nil. So to try and answer that first question, we turned to CFCT, who's done the polling, and Jack, why don't you show them what it is we found?
Yeah, thanks, Doug. And you can go ahead and put up the research slide, because there's the data on there for people to take in. For 5 years now, CFCT has been asking U.S. adults the same question. It's on your screen. Do you favor or oppose your state providing free tuition at public universities or colleges for anyone who is academically qualified? And the size of those bar charts, even if you can't see the little numbers, is why we actually refer to free college as a tripartisan issue, not just a bipartisan issue. In addition to the all on the left of the screen, you can see the breakouts by party affiliation. In our most recent polling, shown in the 2020 column, which was conducted just in September, so it's quite fresh, shows a near high water mark for the concept of people around the country. 78% of all respondents either strongly or somewhat favored the concept of free college. Importantly, that is 63% among Republicans, so significantly more than a significant majority, and 74% of independents. strongly are favoring the concept. Go ahead and change the slide. But of course, liking an idea, saying that you favor it, is only half the battle. In addition to popularity, what Doug had to take back to Michigan is that it should be considered a priority because there are spending limits. Earlier this year, we asked people to rank free 2-year and free 4-year tuition against a number of other public policy investments. Of note here is the ranking among Republicans of free 2-year tuition. Second place among the 9 issues we tested. And among independents, free 2-year tuition was the 3rd most popular, or considered the 3rd highest priority, and free 4-year was 5th. So it's this uniformity of support that I think gives a lot of people political cover from whichever of these 3 buckets they come from, to say that supporting free college is a bi and tripartisan idea. Doug?
Good. Thanks, Jack. So step 2, after learning that the proposal enjoyed strong bipartisan or tripartisan public support, we needed to figure out how could we ensure that a proposal from a Democratic governor to a Republican legislature would not be dead on arrival. And if in fact it was able to stay alive, where would the momentum come from that is required to move any major piece of legislation through the whole process of committee hearings and floor votes and so forth? And so the question became, was there an external bipartisan coalition that could be assembled that would be strong enough to get the parties to deal with the issue and ultimately move it to final passage? And it quickly became clear that the key was the business community. The good news was, as the governor was running and soon after she took office, the business community pretty much across the board said talent, filling the skills gap, is our #1 priority. And pretty quickly they saw a chance to expand the number of adults with community college associate degrees and occupation certificates as a major way at public expense, not their specific business expense, to expand that pool of skills. We were able to get the president of the Tennessee Chamber of Commerce, who was a major supporter, to contact the president of the Michigan Chamber of Commerce, which is perhaps the most influential of our business groups, and convince him that this was a proposal that was good for business, which led fairly quickly then to the leaders of the major business groups coming to the governor saying, we will support you on this, and putting out a public statement to that effect. Then became important to make sure labor was on board so that our Democratic legislators were comfortable with this. And of course, the community colleges, if they weren't supportive, that clearly was going to raise questions about the proposal. They in fact came together, they staged a large public event with the governor at a local community college where all the business leaders, labor leaders, community college folks all showed up. So we had created that external coalition that was committed to making this happen. Step 3, which in some ways was the most challenging, was getting Republicans in the legislature to take major ownership of Reconnect, so that it wasn't simply a Democratic governor proposing it, but actually something they owned too. We were able to take a number of legislators to Tennessee to actually meet the leadership of the Tennessee Reconnect and begin to see how that worked. Most importantly, we got Democrats in the legislature who were eager to sponsor it to agree to step aside and let a Republican be the principal sponsor in each house. And we were able to find Republicans who sustained a lot of respect from within their respective caucuses. And so at that point, we began very intensive, almost daily negotiations between Republican staffers, governor's office, constantly keeping the business folks, the labor folks, the community college folks in the loop so that everybody knew what was going on, everybody had a voice, and everybody stayed engaged. Then a major pivot, I think, that the governor engineered was we have been moving along. We still had not passed it by the beginning of 2020. So in her second State of the State, rather than touting her reconnect proposal, the governor talked about this very exciting bill that was moving through the legislature, Reconnect, that would provide tuition-free access to all adults, and called out the leadership by name of the Republicans who were moving it, as well as the enthusiastic Democratic co-sponsors, and asked them to get her a bill in whatever form they were going to get it to her, and that she was eager to sign it. And that continued to help foster this feeling that this was not a narrow Democratic bill, but a broad bipartisan business, labor, community college measure. And the final step, step 4, was then actually getting this to the floor and getting it voted on. And while the legislature knew that the governor wanted it, and therefore it could become a measure around which a lot of negotiation could occur in terms of what are you going to give me, because of the external coalition, it was primarily the business and labor groups that did the lobbying. They were the ones that moved it. And we had done it such that there ended up without a single organized opposition. Even the libertarian think tank in Lansing, which had influence with a variety of members of the Republican caucus, was moved to at least neutrality. And the outcome was passed the Senate 36-2, the House 94-13. And after a delay due to the coronavirus, Republican appropriations committees voted, and the House and Senate both voted by similar margins to provide the appropriations to do it. It's kind of a last step here. We did get a chance to pre-test it a little bit. Using federal funds, the governor created a GI Bill for frontline workers. In other words, Reconnect simply for those that had to work while the rest of us sequestered. It was announced in early September. 3 months later, we're close to 100,000 applicants. So the demand is strong, and Reconnect is scheduled to launch on February 1st, and we're expecting another 50,000 plus to do it. So in summary, our formula: supportive public opinion, strong bipartisan external coalition with business and labor, explicit efforts to encourage the leadership of the other party to own the proposal, and then lobbying led by the external coalition. So,
thanks, Doug.
that's
That's good stuff.
right.
And appreciate your case study, but also appreciate your success in making all that happen in Michigan. For a few minutes here, we now want to turn to Jack and present some polling results that have to do with federal programs as opposed to the work that's been done so effectively in 25 states across the country to make college, at least some colleges, tuition-free in those locations. Jack?
Thanks. In our September poll, so again, just a couple of months back, we asked Americans about 3 varieties, if you will, of potential federal programs in the area of free tuition. The first one is similar to the program that Doug just referenced in Michigan, is regarding free tuition to frontline workers in the fight against COVID. And you can see, again, pretty universal support, 78%, the same number nationally that support free college tuition among those academically qualified. And 68% among Republicans and 72% among independents. Change the slide, please. If you go inside of that from a research standpoint, what we're impressed with is how close all those bars are to the purple line across the top, which is the average of all. And you can see that there really are no pockets of opposition to this idea, and you'll see that that continues into the other ideas. There is less support among people over the age of 65, but not in a significant way that we think would deter any discussion of that kind of program. Change the slide, please. Okay, yeah, I don't have it. The second one we asked is, do you favor or oppose a federal program that provides 2 years of free community college to individuals looking, and we think this is important, looking to learn and improve their skills? And you can see we have had a little bump, right? We've been at 78, now we're up at 81. And importantly, Republican support here goes to 72. And from our experience in asking these questions over the years, we believe this line, individuals looking to learn and improve their skills, which kind of takes it just a half a step away from free college to actually the benefit that a person would get from additional skills training, fuels this level of support. Change the slide, please. And again, there is near uniformity across the ethnic, income, and age breakouts of this question. You do see that there's some additional support among Black and Hispanics. And this concept, again, learn and improve their skills, does quite well with people under the age of 55. And the last one we asked, turn this slide, is the means tested question. And this is includes 4-year colleges and universities with the means tested at 125. You will note again, a statistically significant decline in support for this idea among all the groups, Democrats, Republicans, Independents. Switch the slide, please. And you see a little bit more variation and among the subgroups, with people with income under 75 supporting it, younger people supporting it, but there's a greater differential and a little bit more pushback on means testing than there is in universality, which was embedded in the other two questions.
And Jack, thank you very much for that. As you can see, we're turning our attention to some of these federal issues that we'll be debating, I'm sure, in the coming year. We do have time for some of your questions, and I think all 4 of our presenters will be back on screen shortly to answer them. But while we're doing that, make sure that if you have questions for either Doug or Jack, you also submit those through the Zoom Q&A button. And now we'll begin by going back to a couple of questions that came in earlier for Michelle and Brad, and give them a chance to answer. I want to start, Michelle, with you. There is a great variety of success around the country, and the person asked, what do you believe are best practices in terms of whether community-based programs should be universal, merit-based, et cetera? And I know that you have lots to say on this, but try and keep your answer to within 2 minutes if you can.
I sure can. Yeah, I won't say a lot about it. I will just say that our research suggests that universal programs have deeper and more far-reaching effects than more targeted programs, whether those targeted programs are targeted by high school GPA or attendance or financial need. The reason is that a very important role of these promise programs is to serve as catalysts for change in other systems. So many of them have been shown to help create robust college-going cultures within the K through 12 system. They have brought into being new forms of student support for students who might not have been on a college-going track, but are now finding themselves at community college. And all of those catalytic effects of promise programs are more powerful if the promise program is for everyone. So that's the short version of why we are fans of universal tuition-free college programs. And if you have more questions, please hit me up individually, and I will talk for a long time on this question.
Well, it's a great question because we also have some polling answers to some of those questions, not in terms of their effectiveness, which is your domain. But Jack, we also asked, as I recall, whether people would favor universal, everybody is entitled to the program, kind of promise programs at the state level, or whether they prefer one that's limited either greatly in terms of targeting lower income communities or expansive into the middle class, a la the 125,000. And do you remember, because I do, the results from that question?
I do. And in fact, we've asked it in different ways over the years to confirm the appeal of universality. And there's no question that when means testing is added as a feature or a requirement of a program, that support goes down. In some cases, as much as 8 to 10%, which in today's world is a big difference. And Morley, I assume you will pitch the briefing book on the website. Yeah, there are years of research data available.
Terrific. Thank you, Jack. Now I have one for you, Brad, and you may not be able to answer this yet. It may have to wait until April. But there are several questions that have come in with regard to your findings in researching the Kalamazoo program, as well as related questions around some of the data, preliminary data we have from Tennessee. Let's focus again on Kalamazoo. One person asked if there are variations among racial and ethnic groups in regard to the earnings numbers that you came up with and data that you came up with. And the other question related to statistical significance about those earnings differences. And I'm not sure that you can answer those questions yet, but I'll let you give it a crack at it now.
I'll try. There's not too much that I can say about it. You're right. It's still a little bit early. So far, we're not finding large differences across racial or ethnic groups, or whether students were eligible for free or reduced price lunch or not. They're just, it's a little bit noisy, so it's hard for us to say anything definitive, but we're certainly not seeing large differences across groups, at least at this point. And in return to the other question about statistical significance, getting into the heart of it, looking at earnings effects is generally been hard in this literature. When other researchers have tried to do this with other state programs, including large merit programs like West Virginia's, or even large need-based programs like California's, even when you have an entire state and lots of data and people to do this over, it still is difficult to find statistically significant impacts because earnings are just really variable. Some people are making $100,000 at the age of 25. Some people aren't even making 5,000. And so when the outcomes are just really variable, trying to find an effect becomes somewhat harder. And so our estimates too are pretty noisy. And that's why we were kind of excited by the fact that you can see an increase that is statistically significant of the likelihood of earnings being above this middle range of, say, $24,000 to $40,000. Again, kind of in people's mid to late 20s, which is not fantastic. But you remember, this is a program for everyone who got treated for the promise. Some of those people got a college degree, but not all of them did. And so that is still not necessarily a bad amount, especially if you look at what the normal numbers of how much people are making turn out to be. That's pretty solid. And so we're continuing to evaluate it. And we're also looking into people who are leaving the state, for example, for better employment opportunities elsewhere. We're trying to do some qualitative interviews there. And once the paper is ready to widely circulate, we will share it and those outcomes as well.
Thanks, Brad. Doug, we have a question for you. In your case study, you mentioned and talked a good deal about how you did the business community coalition, even importing friends and family, so to speak, from Tennessee to help with that. But any details on organized labor's role in Michigan? I know from my prior years there that the MEA is a larger organization, the equivalent to the NEA, to the AFT, which tends to be focused in cities. But any differences or activities or challenges in the labor activity or support? Yeah, we don't have you, Doug. Your mic is muted, Doug. Please unmute your mic.
Yes, I'm unmuted. In Michigan, as I think in probably a lot of states, anytime you have business and labor together behind a common measure, you have something that has potential to move. So having labor on board, the AFL-CIO and its various affiliates, including the American Federation of Teachers and the Michigan Education Association was critical for creating this balanced bipartisan coalition, plus reassuring Democrats. The most interesting issue became around the construction trades and their concerns as to how this would interact with their apprenticeship programs. And interestingly, the Republicans were as interested in having the trades comfortable with this as Democrats were. And ultimately, as we were able to work those issues out, that reassured everybody that they could support this and there wasn't going to be any negative feedback from any groups that played any role in their elections. And that politically was very important.
Thanks, Doug. Jack, a question for you came in. Have we done polls that compare, we being CFCT, compare proposals that speak of free tuition or free college tuition, public college tuition, and those that ask about debt-free public higher education, which is a different phrase that's often used? Have we tested that at all over the 4 years?
Now you are testing my memory on that, and I'm not going to say for.
The answer is no.
I feel like we did once, and then free college tested at a higher level, and we continued to go with that. I will say that there is in the briefing book a whole section on messaging, in which we have tested various messages that resonate with people that can be used to describe programs, and there are some that are significantly more powerful in getting people interested in to support a free college program. So I think that's worth checking out.
And that's going to lead me into a reference to our resources here in a second. I do want to add that in addition to messaging, we have done polling, thanks to Jack, on a whole series of requirements that can be part of a free college tuition program, which are true. The answers are true, I suspect, in federal as well as state settings, although these were asked in state settings. We've referred to one, which is with regard to whether it should be income limited or universal. But we've also tested issues around grade point average, community service, other requirements such as being drug free that have been raised in different state debates, and we've been able to address in that polling. I want to, in fact, tell you about how we're going to continue this conversation on all these issues, the research, as well as our detailed policy examinations here in a second, if you can put up that slide. But I want to make sure as we do so to thank all the folks whose questions we don't have time to answer for asking them. We've had lots of great engagement in the final minute or two that we have for this program. So if that next slide can come up, that would be great. It lists the next set of programs will begin in 2021 with regard to webinars on specific topics, more on economic modeling and research, as well as how you make the case for free college, kind of the messaging material that Jack just referred to, as well as the questions that have come up today. How does this address issues of equity in higher education? Are there programs that do a better job of that than others? And of course, you've heard Brad and Michelle promise you that they will have detailed results finished. They didn't give a date, but I'm going to put one on it around April. And we will certainly share with you, all of you who've been on this call, what results we get back when all of that is done. In the interim, you can turn to the briefing book mentioned several times by Jack, which is on our website. Other issues there are on the website, including in our policy center, a great deal of discussion about this idea and its political power as well as its effectiveness. You can also continue to contact us in the interim at the URL listed here on the slide. freecollegenow.org is the overall website for us, and contact underlined us is a way to making further contact. Again, as we hit the top of the hour, we're going to finish on time, which may be a first for these kind of virtual conferences. And I want to thank everybody for participating in today's conversation and presentation. And we look forward to seeing you next year. And please, everyone, have a happier new year than the one you had this year. Thank you.